Our next speaker is Panagiotis Pavlos from
Thank
the
you very much.
University of Oslo. And the title of the paper is The Reality of Evil in Dionysius the Areopagite. Mr. Pavlos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do you hear me well? Because I have experienced some trouble.
Yes. We hear you very well.
And thank you so much for this possibility and opportunity to be among with you. George, especially, thank to you. So I'll try to be brief, and my topic is the question of evil in Dionysius the Areopagite. If one reads the treatise of Dionysius on the divine names, and especially the first part of chapter 4, one will probably come to wonder if the good is so superabundant, so complete, so embracing everything, so much all-inclusive and including the whole, so overwhelmingly good and loving and caring that nothing which is misses to share in the good, and nothing which is not ontologically dependent on the good, which means it is dependent on the good, then one wonders, where is evil to be found? Is there really any place for evil? Any possibility to speak about it, sense it, or acknowledge it, and in any way, whether as an intelligible or a sensible being, on, or a quality, poiotes, or even a state, hexis? Dionysius dedicates a whole paragraph in which he bombs the reader literally with nearly all the possible questions one could raise about evil. And this is the passage, the extract number 1 in the handout that I guess George is taking care of right now.
Yes, in 1 minute.
And just let me read it until it comes. So Dionysius writes there that, and yet one might say, if the beautiful and good is beloved and desired and esteemed by all, for even that which is non-existing desires it, as we have said, as he has said earlier, and struggles how to be in it, and itself the good is the form giving, even of things without form, and by its goodness alone, even the non-existing is said to be, and is super-essentially, how is it that the host of demons does not desire the beautiful and good, but through their earthly proclivities, having fallen away from the angelic identity as regards the desire of the good, have become cause of all evils both to themselves and to all the others who are said to be corrupted? And why, in short, when the tribes of demons have been brought into being from the good, are they not like the good? Or how, after being a good production from the good, were they changed? And what is that which depraved them? And in short, what is evil? And from what source did it spring? And in which of things existing is it? And how did he who is good will to bring it into being? And how, when he willed it, he was able to? And if evil is from another cause, what other cause is there for things existing beside the good? Further, how, when there is a providence, is there evil either coming into existence at all or not destroyed? And how does any existing thing desires it in comparison with the good? In this extremely dense section of the Divine Names, paragraph 18, the Areopagite not only details in 12 sub-questions what are the fundamental questions that can be more or less raised about evil, but also compresses some of the most intriguing issues in the history of Neoplatonism, such as the concept of the fall, the problem of theodicy, the case of Manichaean dualism, and of course, providence. I shall try to briefly mention some key points that Dionysius makes in answering these questions on evil, and I shall also try to draw some remarks that will bring about what is, I believe, the novelty with the Areopagite's account on evil. First, the evil is not from the good, and for Dionysius, if it is from the good, then it is not evil. And there he uses the example of the fire, which as the fire, namely, does not produce cold, in a similar way, the good does not produce evil. Second, if all beings are from the good, and the nature of the good is to produce and preserve, while the nature of the evil is to corrupt, destroy, and dissolve, then none of the beings is from evil. And from this point derives the third, that evil is not, does not exist, since it could not be a being, should it be evil to itself. Next, in the case evil should not be evil to itself, then it would not be entirely, completely, fully, one could say, evil, but it would have a share in the good through which evil would be a being. And further, if all beings are from the good, and the good is beyond beings, and this is a direct reference to Plato's Republic, then even non-being is being in the good, to agato, but the evil is neither being, since then it would not be entirely evil, as we already said, nor non-being, for the absolutely non-being would be nothing, unless we speak it in the super-essential Hyperusian way of the good. And here it would be worth noting that this duality of the apophatic discourse of Dionysius that he uses throughout the corpus, because it helps us understand these distinctions he's making here. For Dionysius, a name is predicable in three possible ways: the affirmative, cataphatic, for instance, a being, toon; the negative, the apophatic, in terms of absence, lack of privation, for instance, non-being as mion, that is not being; or in terms of excess or superabundance, as he uses very famously the term hyperousios, referring to the non-being, but not as privation, but as that which exceeds being. And to the last two possibilities, Dionysius employs the derivatives a and the superlative preposition hyper, hyperousios, hyperagathos, respectively. Now further, while the good is long prior abiding and far beyond both the mere being and non-being, the evil, be neither in the beings nor in non-being, is ever more far distant from the good, and thus more unsubstantial than the very non-being. So where does evil come from, one might say? And here Dionysius most likely refers to Proclus, who makes a similar case at the opening of the Malorum Subsistentia treatise. For if evil does not exist, then virtue and vice should be identical, both universally and particularly considered, and thus that which opposes virtue would not be an evil. Dionysius reiterates, in order to object it later on, a sequence of thoughts rooted back to Plato's Theaetetus 176a, which is in passage 2 in your handout. I will not read it. And there, the idea is that it's necessary to grant some sort of evil as opposition to the good. And the reason for such a necessity is that the very nature of the good, that as it stems from one principle and it is a product of a single source and cause, it rejoices in communion, unity, and friendship, and therefore it, the good, cannot be opposite to its own self. Not even what is claimed over and over again, namely that evil lies in matter, qua matter, cannot be accepted by Dionysius. For matter too, as he says, has a share in the ornament, the cosmos, in beauty, kalos, and form, eidos. Dionysius distinguishes, and here we have a clear objection to Plato's Theaetetus, between evil and necessity, and thus between matter and evil insofar as matter represents necessity. Arguing that matter is necessary for the formation of the cosmos as a whole cannot entail that matter is evil, because then there are two further problems. The first, how the good demiurge leads something into being from evil, and the second, how can evil need the good since it is evil? Dionysius also addresses in brief Manichaeism on the basis of the detailed argument that later on St. John of Damascus will expand in his treatise against the Manichaeans. Here is in brief what he says. Assuming that matter is evil, then if A, matter is absolutely not being, then it's neither good nor evil, and B, matter is somehow being, and given that all beings are from the good, matter too should be from the good, and then one of the following should happen. Either the good would be productive of evil, and thus evil coming from the good should be also good itself, or either evil would be productive of the good, and thus the good coming from the evil would be evil itself, or there are right away two principles, which the more are suspended for another head. And finally, evil does not exist of its own. As Dionysius puts it, evil is not a being. I'll drop a very short corollary that I had prepared to read for you because time is running out, and I will jump up to conclusions. Now, I would dare to conclude by saying that, quite paradoxically perhaps, Dionysius approaches evil as a non-ontological reality, which, however, is distinguished by ontological effects. The Dionysian principle and strong identity, tautotis, union, if you like, henosis, of being and goodness and its consequences, that is, that the good is, or that good is everything that is, or that nothing can be without being good, that is, without having a share in goodness, leaves no room for making the case of evil as being. The Neoplatonic identification of evil with non-being is objected by Dionysius both by means of ontological and linguistic arguments, while the identification with matter is also objected by highlighting the internal inconsistencies of such arguments and also by resorting to the refutation of Manichaeism. Dionysius' account on evil is certainly consciously updated with Platonic and Neoplatonic parameters, but not in a restrictive way. That is, although there are similarities in his treatment of evil with Proclus, and although a source of his argumentation seems to be, as in the case of Proclus, Plato and Plotinus to a certain degree, Dionysius' account moves beyond Neoplatonism. The Areopagite leads the Platonic principle of divine goodness of the Demiurge in the Timaeus 29e to its logical and ontological extremes, while it is rather correct to stress that the Dionysian notion of divine goodness is much more radicalized than it appears in Plato, Plotinus, and Proclus. In plenty many occasions throughout the treatise on the divine names, Dionysius invites and no less warns the reader to avoid confusing his own account with other similar Neoplatonist theories on evil, since, as it may be reasonably remarked, it is not the likenesses of the words, but the unlikeness of experiences that account for differences in conceiving of evil as a corollary deriving from the failure of a personal encounter with the good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Panagiotis, for your interesting paper. Are there any questions or remarks? Maria, please.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Panagiotis, for your very interesting paper. What I would like to ask is whether Dionysius says anything about the possibility of thinking about evil, since he identifies it with non-being, as you said. Does he say anything about thinking about it or formulating it verbally? I mean, does he? I'm just asking, or maybe you said something and I missed it, so forgive me if this is the case.
So, because I also lost the connection, could you just conclude
Yes.
by repeating briefly?
Does Dionysius say anything about thinking about evil or formulating evil linguistically, verbally, since he identifies it with non-being? So can we think about evil, or can we say something evil? Does he say anything on this?
Right. Thank you. So, I mean, Dionysius employs the same pattern that everybody that has dealt with evil does, namely, whether is about to conclude that evil exists in any way, either or. He uses the name tokakon, And I think he mostly uses or exclusively uses the name tokakon in singular, not in the plural. And then he proceeds to this investigation of whether, and if yes, what should be ascribed to this term tokakon as evil. Another thing he also does is that he, and you can see that in your handout, that he primarily refers to evil by addressing that which calls demonic host, demonia plethys. And this makes a critical and substantial, I believe, difference from Neoplatonism, because we will know that for Proclus, for instance, the demons, they are just part of a certain trinity of intermediary beings that serve a certain role in the Neoplatonic hierarchy. But for Dionysius, that's not the case. For Dionysius, and this is also interesting from the point of view that speaking of demons in a discussion of evils, that means that we have already associated evil, even in an explicit way, with a being. And that raises further the question, but well, isn't that not a paradox? Since we have assumed and we have said that evil is not a being, how then can we speak about a demonic host who is full of evil in a way? So this is a second aspect of his investigation, where he in a way locates evil on certain beings, but of course there are qualifications in that they are not ontologically evil, if you like. They are just beings that for some reasons they have failed, they have fallen apart completely or partially from the share in the good. I don't know if that answers.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So we have time for another question or remark. So, Panagiotis, could you make a brief statement or a brief, tell me your views, if it's possible, about why Dionysius did not follow Proclus on the plural evils and prefer the singular evil?
Thank you very much, George. That's a very interesting question. Well, there are several things one can say here. For the first, insofar as the plural makes one to think of ontologically evils, so that there are some things which are evil, whether we have to figure out how they are evil, because they come against, in contrast with the principle that being is not evil, being qua being, I mean. And this is also something accepted by Proclus. So for Proclus too, being cannot be evil. But let us leave it aside. The reason why Dionysius would never accept that is because he belongs to this tradition which is shaped by a very fundamental distinction, and we don't have it in pagan Hellenic thinking, that between created and uncreated. So for a Christian thinker, as Dionysius is, everything that which is created out of nothing. And again, there is a debate about whether Dionysius has an account of creationism and to what extent and so on. But we know that the line of the tradition here in which Dionysius belongs is that we have a creation out of nothing by God, and God creates concrete beings. So it's in this view, there's no sense, there make no sense to speak of evils in a plural way, insofar as that would indicate the existence of certain things that are evil as such. I can continue. I don't know if.
No, thank you very much, but we ran out of time. So.
But thank you. That's a very critical point, and appreciate that you bring it up.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Elenka Klamano from Trinity College, Dublin. And the title of your paper is Proclus on Plato's Opening Lines.
Thank you, Professor Free. Can I upload a handout? Is it possible to do it myself?
Yes, of course. I will make co-host, so you will
Thank
have all
you.
of the rights.
Apologies for not sending earlier.
No, that's okay. So I think now it's possible.
Okay, thank you. I'll do it just right now. Apologies for not opening the camera. I had a really bad car accident, so my face is partly bruised.
Our best wishes for a quick recovery.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just a second to upload the paper. I'm so sorry for the delay.
Oh, don't worry.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, it's okay now.
Okay, I see. You can see it now. Thank you. Okay, to start with, we know that the view that the dramatic details of a Platonic dialogue, and more specifically those found in its poems, should be approached by taking into consideration the views, arguments, counter-arguments of the main part of the dialogue is a trend, let's say, nowadays in Platonic studies, especially thanks to Miles Perniet's paper on Plato's first words. Yet this view goes back to antiquity and most prominently to Proclus, and especially in his commentary in Parmenides, Proclus asks how we, the readers of Plato, could or should read the preambles of the dialogues. Berget more specifically says, so far from the operating scene telling you how to read the philosophy that follows, it is the philosophy that tells you how to read the opening scene. Yet we know that Proclus is not the first Platonist to have opinions on how we should read Plato. In his commentary in the Timaeus, Proclus himself treats Crantor of Soli, a first-generation Platonist of the late 4th and early 3rd century, as a first interpreter, or as a protos to Platonos exegetis. Harold Tarrant has suggested that Crantor may have also written an interpretive work devoted to the Theaetetus, noting that it was one of the earliest dialogues to have attracted exegesis. Although the Crantor work on the Timaeus does not tell us much about the preambles, it is in the anonymous commentary on the Theaetetus we found very interesting elements regarding the subject matter of a dialogue, but not many, and he doesn't comment much on the famous poem of the Theaetetus. It is the Amblichus actually who contributes substantially to the attempt, let's say, to confine the introductory portions of the dialogue under the general prescriptions of relevance through the application of a systematic allegorizing. Proclus himself says as at his commentary in the Timaeus, Porphyry and the Amblichus declared the introduction to be in accord with the overall theme of the dialogue. The former, namely Porphyry, dealing it with a piecemeal way, merikoteron, while the latter with insight, epoptikoteron, into the higher mysteries. In his commentary in the Parmenides, Proclus is enumerating the roles that Plato preambles have, and he pleads to the interpretation suggested by his predecessors, classifies them, and elaborates his own consideration against this background. In order to understand Proclus' attempt, let us see in full probably the main source as regards the understanding of the preludes of the dialogue by the ancient. By the ancient here, Proclus means his predecessors down to the time of Iamblichus. And this is the passage, the translations based by Morrow and Dillon. So he actually divides the early commentators' views on the poems into three main groups. people who have not examined or commented them at all. Among them, in his commentary in the Timaeus, he classifies Severus and Chalcidius, who omit any exegesis of the problem of the Timaeus. And here it is interesting to note that Proclus appears to divide, at least implicitly, the current group, namely the group that hasn't examined at all the problems, in two categories. There are those who claim that the problems comprise some random content without an essential or even significant relation to the subject matter of the dialogue, therefore not worth reading or commenting upon. There are also the readers who think that the poems comprise mere preliminaries that are useful, that every careful reader of a Platonic dialogue and familiar with Plato's philosophical writing already knows. Proclus completely dismisses this view, mainly on the basis of generosity on the part of the commentator of a Platonic dialogue. We found a strong statement on the very last line of the passage that Plato could not possibly leave a part of the dialogue without proper function or role. You can see that the very first last line of the current passage. This claim is very well described nowadays by Margaret Macquarie, who says that if the dialogues of Plato adheres to the verbal tradition of Heraclitus, it is a good interpretive method that Plato writes no words in vain. The second group, among them Porphyry, as John Dillon and David Sedley have extensively argued, refers to the readers who think that the usefulness of the poems lies in the presentation of moral duties, καθήκοντα, of a word of Stoic origin. The idea of this interpretive principle appears to be the everyday setting of the dialogue, persons and actions found in the poems contribute substantially to our understanding of what is morally appropriate. As Paulina Reams has argued lately in her work on Proclus' poem on Alcibiades, it is not katorthoma, right action, virtuous action, or perfection, but a word that refers to the morality at the level of civic, not perfect virtue, the virtue of embodied, real human beings we witness in the dialogues. The same group of commentators also seem to think that the poems are relevant for the structure, for the economia of the central problems of the dialogue. The third group of commentators, among them Proclus himself, support the view that the things in the pragmata in the poems refer to the topic or explanation, anaptixis of the dialogue. He further adds two crucial views of how the preamble relates to the topic and the central problems of the dialogue. One way of capturing the relation between poem and the main dialogue is to tell that the poem portrays eikonizo, the content of the forthcoming dialogue. Namely, the poem presents in another dramatic form the same central features that will be extensively and directly discussed in the main part of the dialogue. If we follow this reading, the poems, although might be a useful and indispensable tool in our understanding of the dialogue subject matters, it does not give us a full account of Proclus' attempt. As John Dillon has pointed out, it mainly refers to the Pythagorean method of introducing the scientific topics and the instructions through images. And there is a certain passage in Proclus' commentary in the Timaeus who says that some, namely Porphyry, taking the recapitulation of the Republic in an ethical sense, say that it reveals to us that we must enter upon the contemplation of the universe in an ethically ordered frame of mind. Others, like Iamblichus, consider that it has been placed before the whole inquiry into nature, physiologia, as an image, icon, of the organization of the universe. But for the Pythagoreans, and there John Dillon claims that it's a Pythagorean method, had the habit of placing before the scientific instruction the revelation of the subject under inquiry through omia and images and icones. And after this, of introducing the secret indication of the same subjects through symbols, and then in this way, after the reactivization of the soul's ability to comprehend the intelligible realm, and there's this kind of line continues this kind of thought. To a great extent, Miles Burnet's reading of the poems that we saw earlier relies on a reading, on an interpretation of the poems as images. Yet there is another, and I think more substantial way to understand the relation between poems and the main dialogue, and this is the metaphor of zone, the living being. You can see it in the passage, which is a direct reference to the formulation of the organic unity at 264c of the Phaedrus, namely the comparison between a well-constructed logos and the self-contained unity of an animal body with head, feet, and middle parts. Therefore, Proclus appears to adopt a fundamental methodological principle. The relationship between a dialogue and this poem appears to be a relation between a whole and a part. The poem could play the same role as the other parts of the dialogue, namely as we could say co-determined or of the dialogue as a whole. Both metaphors emphasize the importance of the poems for the understanding of the whole dialogue, and both utilize the idea of holism. Yet there is to seem a certain tension between these two interpretations: the metaphor of image and the metaphor of living being. As various scholars have supported lately, the metaphor of zone, rather than functioning in a preliminary way for the rest of the dialogue, a synoptic or a metaphorical depiction or representation of the whole, the way that the symbols and images act, allow us to understand the poem as a proper and integral part of the whole. Further, the zone metaphor covers cases where the preamble contains some extra additional features that help us not only to understand the dialogue itself, but also to attract us as readers. This allows Proclus to introduce the issue of moral attitudes that we find, again, 3 lines before the end of the passage. A typical example could well be the preamble of the Phaedrus or the Theaetetus. Yet, these moral attitudes are not irrelevant of the actual topic of the dialogue, but are inextricably related to the subject of the central problems discussed. Thank you. I hope it didn't go very fast. It's an ongoing project on Plato's poems, so I'm more than happy to have some feedback on this, especially on the second view, on the living being. And here's a second passage where there is a very crucial word which is συναρμόζεται. Say, τον υποκείμενο πραγμάτων μιλώνουν συναρμόζεται, which I didn't really discuss here. Thank you, and apologies if I...
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or remarks for Mrs. Kaklamano? Please, Donna Salad.
Thank you very, very much for this very interesting talk, which I connected with some of the things here. I never thought to think about what happens in a commentator, what happens to those things like preludes, myths, illustrations. But I did notice in a different exegetical sort of work, working in the Galenic corpus, that very systematically in the summaries of the Galenic corpuses, which have a sort of the same status as an exegesis.
Sure. I can't hear you. Yes.
Yes, please don't unmute yourself because you're muted yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll be
Sorry, I missed the last part of what you were saying.
Okay, I'll be very short. I'm making what you describe here is a beautifully comparable with what I've seen in a different relationship between a summaries and a Galenic texts, where
Thank you for pointing out this.
what?
Thank you very much for pointing out the Galenic text, which I haven't really looked at it.
But it's a similar relationship to what you're describing, because in the summaries they take away all of the case histories, the examples, the rhetoric, all of those things. They just leave the science in there, and it's systematically it's a different status of a text. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other question or remark, please? Okay, so if there are no other question or remarks, thank you for your rich paper. And I would like to call Maria Chriti from the Aristotle University of Salonika. The title of her paper is Cratilus' Linguistic Theory in Ammonius Commentaries, Smoothing the Extremities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have prepared a PowerPoint. I did send a handout, but I would like to share my PowerPoint. Is this possible, George?
Yes, of course. You are already a co-host in this session, so
I am.
do it by yourself.
Okay, great. So, yes, just a minute. This is it. You see it? Could you tell me if you can see it, my PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Is it obvious? So, I did share my screen. Just a minute. Now, is it obvious now?
No, but if you no, yes, now it's okay. It's okay. Now it's okay.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. It's great to be among all of you. What I would like to share with you today is the reception of Platonic linguistics in the Cratilus by Ammonius of Hermias, the 6th century Alexandrian Neoplatonic commentator on Aristotle.
Maria, excuse me,
Yes.
since you face some connectivity problems, please close your camera because the bandwidth has some problems. It will be better, I think.
What? Sorry?
If it's possible, close your camera because your connectivity is not so well. Your connection faces some problems.
Okay. So, okay. Okay. I will. Is it okay now?
Let's try and we'll see.
Yes, okay, sorry for this. Okay. Hear me? Can you see my PowerPoint now?
Not yet, because I think that there's a problem with the connection, with the stability of your connection.
I have a very good connection, actually. Sorry, but in on my screen, it is obvious that my screen is being shared, so you can't see it.
No, not yet.
No. Okay. Just what? Sorry for this.
Just a second.
Let me try again. Mm-hmm.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Okay, great.
Okay,
so
okay.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm very excited to be participating in this. And what I would like to share with you today is Reception of Platonic linguistics as it is formulated in Cratilus by Ammonius of Hermias, the 6th century on Aristotle. Now, Ammonius' commentary on Aristotle's On Interpretation is one of the two surviving Greek Neoplatonic commentaries written on one of the two surviving linguistic texts of ancient Greek philosophy, respectively. The first one, of course, is Plato's Cratilus. Then we have Aristotle's On Interpretation, for which we have Ammonius' commentary. Now, both Proclus and Ammonius talk about both Plato and Aristotle, but what makes Ammonius' treatment more intriguing is the fact that Ammonius was the student of Proclus in Athens, and then he became the teacher of Simplicius, John Philoponus, probably Olympiodorus, and other Neoplatonists in Alexandria, where Aristotle was explained as Plato's best student to facilitate the access to the divine Plato according to the prescriptive environment of the school of Alexandria. So Ammonius can actually give us a picture about the way that the Neoplatonic doctrines were transferred from Athens of Proclus, Alexandria, the metropolis of a very transitional era. Ammonius is also a follower of the so-called principle of agreement between Plato and Aristotle. According to this principle, Plato and Aristotle had superficial differences and they basically agreed with each other. This principle was not followed by every, but Ammonius is the only one who tries to apply this principle on Plato's and Aristotle's linguistic positions. Now, in order to see the way that Ammonius treats Plato, Aristotle, and also Proclus in his commentary, we will start saying a few things, because then we will go on with a few basic things on Aristotle's interpretation, so that we can proceed with what Proclus says, and so that we can see what is the new Ammonius has to bring in the Neoplatonic doctrines. Now, Plato's Cratilus is a very much discussed work, as I'm sure you are all aware of. There is this linguistic discussion.
Maria, excuse me, but we are unable to hear you because the connection is very poor. So I would suggest to, if it's possible, try to reconnect, and we will go to the next speaker, and after Olga's Akumova's paper, we have another chance to hear you better. Please, please try to do something with your with the router. Try to stabilize your connection, and in a few minutes we will try again. So excuse us for the connectivity problems. And I would like to call Olga Akunova. She is at the HCS University, and the title of her paper is Philosophy as an Instrument of Plot Making on Platonic Key to Apuleius Metamorphosis.
I would like to share my...
Yes, I will share it for you. Don't worry. Give me a second and I will share it.
I can also show, oh, okay. Just a second, PowerPoint. Do you see something on your screen?
Okay, you do it by yourself. Okay.
Everything is okay?
Yes, it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you so much. My theme is on your screens, and everyone has a good idea of the content of Apuleius' novel. Just in case, I will recall that the novel is written from the first person. Its protagonist is a young man by the name of Lucius, and the action takes place in Thessaly and ends in Rome, which turns Lucius into an ass, and in the appearance of an ass, he undergoes various ordeals and is eventually saved by the goddess Isis. The idea that the novel has a Platonic connotation has been developing in science gradually but steadily, and today hardly anyone doubts that the Platonic component is somehow or other a part of the structure of the novel. The only thing that gives rise to differences is the place and function of this component and the degree of its significance in the novel. The radical thesis put forward in the middle of 60s of the previous century is that the entire novel as a whole is a philosophical allegory. From this point of view, coded Platonic references are literally found in each character and each toponym in the novel. For example, the name of the city of Eupator, where action starts, is proposed to be interpreted as a reference to the passage from Plato's Republic, where the three parts of the soul are compared to the higher, lower, and middle notes of the scale. The lower note, Eupator, corresponds to the reasonable part of the soul, and therefore we are proposed to regard Eupator as an allegory of the striving of the reasonable part of the soul towards the true and the divine. It is perfectly clear that with this approach to the novel, one finds a great many philosophical allusions and symbols in it, but the novel becomes completely lost behind these allusions and symbols. The desire to see systematic Platonism in the novel has shaped a more moderate viewpoint, according to which the Platonic base underlies the very idea of metamorphosis, on which the entire plot of the Golden S rests, namely, in his novel, as Schlem supposes, Apuleius played upon the Platonic concept of immortal soul, such as it appears in Timaeus, in Phaedrus, and in Phaedo, where it is said that the souls of those who in their former life have indulged in gluttony and violence and drunkenness are likely to pass into the bodies of asses and other beasts of that sort. In 1999, an article was published where its author, analyzing the text of Plato's Republic, arrives at the conclusion that the theme of curiosity, which is the through theme of Apuleius' novel, is linked in Plato himself to the specific image of soul, which Plato creates in Republic, depicting soul in the form of a living being, combining a multiform beast, a lion, and a man. In the Philippus' opinion, Plato's idea consists in the following: responsible for the curiosity in a man are the lion and the beast parts of the soul, and the more injustice, which includes curiosity, he does, the stronger these parts of his soul become, although his shell remains human. According to the Filippo, the image of Lucius the S in Apuleius is Plato's image turned inside out. The beast part of the soul, overfed with curiosity, becomes the appearance, whereas the human stays inside this beast shell. The concept of deep Platonism in Apuleius' novel is developed in the work by Maeve O'Brien. From her point of view, Plato's texts play a decisive role in the shaping of the novel. The key word, O'Brien believes, is Thessaly. The key to the interpretation of this localization is provided by Plato's dialogue Crito, the famous speech of the laws. This speech creates a picture of how Socrates' flight to Thessaly would look. O'Brien draws attention to a number of motives present in this speech. There is a great disorder and license in Thessaly. What awaits Socrates there is a miserable, dependent, and servile situation. The only thing he may enjoy in Thessaly is hearty fear. His escape will entail the loss of appearance. He will have to indulge his attire or wrap himself in a goat skin or some other disguise. The tale of this manner of escape will create laughter among the Thessalians. Was Heloios ekto desmoterio apedidraskes. In fact, as O'Brien believes, the laws in Plato warn Socrates against what Lucius in Apuleius' novel not avoided. He went to Thessaly. He became an object of laughter, laughter. He lost his appearance precisely by raping himself in a skin. And I will add here that he also became an object of laughter in another episode when he amuses people with his skill of dining in a human manner. He found himself in the situation of a slave. One of his masters even calls him a slave. Partly dinner played a special part in Lucius' fate and indirectly led the story to the conclusion. So Apuleius' hero turns out to be anti-Socrates. Now we should recall one circumstance. The story of the adventure of a young man named Lucius, transformed by a witch into an ass, existed in two other Greek versions. The one was entitled Lucius Odes, and its author was Lucian of Samosata. And the other was known as the Metamorphoses, and its author was a certain Lucius of Patri, absolutely unknown author, at least as reported by Photius. Now, I will not dwell on what vast discussion these works have produced. I will only mention that today the following scheme is adopted in science. Both Lucian's writing and Apuleius' novel go back to one common source, this lost metamorphosis of Lucius of Patri. We cannot judge about the content of this later work, but we can judge about Lucian's work. And in this version of the story, the main plot line is present in full, down to many details. So the texts themselves, both Greek and Latin, show striking, sometimes literal similarity. Here, for example, the scheme of selling of Lucius theirs to pseudo-priests of a Syrian goddess. I pay your attention to just two moments. The name, I will show you another slide, and the last phrase, poelei servum vobis purhellum enex mercata perduxi, sed illei poelei horos erat kinaidorum. And if I show you the Greek version, we also have Philebus as a future owner of the S. And pay attention to the phrase, o korasia dulun kimen eonemai kalon kai hedron, esan de ta korasia tauta ochlos kinaidon. Here in the Greek story, the action also unfolds in Thessaly. Lucius Theirs is also an object of laughter. He also finds himself in a situation of a slave, and besides, the theme of curiosity is also a through theme of this Greek version, as well as it is in Apuleius' novel. So the Greek story includes everything which is treated as Platonic in Apuleius' novel. The very idea of metamorphosis which underlies the plot, and it will be recalled that with respect to Apuleius, it is regarded as containing the Platonic concept of reincarnation. The through theme of curiosity, the image of the main character as a man as, which with respect to Apuleius, this image is interpreted Plato's image of soul turned inside out. Individual turns of the plot, enslavement, laughter, dinner, and so on, and topography, Thessaly. So if Apuleius used another author's story for his novel, as it is accepted in the science, we have to assume that he in some way imprinted Platonic meanings into the already existing plot. So the entire Greek version of Lucius' story seems to have been specially created for Platonic interpretation. On the other hand, if all above observations on Apuleius' novel are true, and Platonism actually lies so deeply in the novel as researchers find it to lie, cannot this mean that the very idea of the novel, the image of a man in an ass skin, the turns of its plot, was created by Apuleius himself, under the influence of Plato's texts, whose attentive reader and even translator he was? From this point of view, the statement, for example, that Lucius is anti-Socrates becomes much more substantiated, since a reworking in this way of a hero of a story borrowed from another author is a difficult proposition, whereas creating him in this way by dramatizing Socrates' hypothetical fate in Thessaly is much simpler. In other words, I assume that Apuleius himself shaped the plot of his novel, embodying in it Plato's images and ideas that were the most important to him. My assumption looks even more reasonable if we take into account that the origin of the plot is obscure. In spite of all attempts, the root of the plot have not been found neither in mythology nor in folklore, neither in the ancient world nor in the Near East. What prevents us from looking at things from the proposed point of view? In fact, nothing does. Indeed, it is an accepted convention that Apuleius used a Greek source, this metamorphosis by a certain Lucius of Patri. Thus, the idea of primacy of the Greek metamorphosis of this Lucius of Patri is based only on a presumption of primacy of the Greek over Latin. So on a sort of prejudice, which we may disregard. True, it is believed that Apuleius himself indicated the use of the Greek source in the introduction of the novel by describing his story as fabula graecanica. Sorry? Sorry. Just to show you fabula graecanica. Here it is. The fact is, however, that Graecanicus, so it was considered to be an argument to prove that he had some Greek source at his disposal. But Graecanicus, in Apuleius' own word usage, shows that the thing he calls Graecanicus has only external attributes of the Greek, but it is not Greek by origin. So Fabula Graecanica is a story à la Greek, a story in the Greek manner, but essentially not Greek at all. In addition, the very existence of an author by the name of Lucius of Patri has more than once been put to doubt. My assumption does not tally at all with the accepted scheme of interrelation among the three versions of Lucius' story. But maybe in the light of everything said above, this scheme should be treated with less confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very interesting paper.
What shall I do to be back?
I will do it. No worry.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or remarks for Olga Akinova?
I'm afraid I've used all the time.
No. I would like to make a point, because I think in modern Greek we use the word Graecanica so as to refer to the Greeks of southern Italy and Sicily, to their language. Do you have any idea if in this period they use the term the same way in order to refer to the Greek language, to the Greek dialect to be specific, of southern Italy or Sicily?
Well, as far as I know, Apuleius' lexicon, I've never noticed that he has in mind something. It is always that is made in the manner of Greeks, as Greeks do, but not Greek at all. Greek will be in him will be Graicus, and Graecanicus is a la Greek. But I tried to answer your question. I'm sorry, I've never mentioned that it has something in common with this area, with South Italy and
Yes, I was wondering, because if the same term stands for this period of time, maybe a possible source from that region will be possible for Apuleius.
Well, it should be made some investigation, but I suppose that it could be really.
Yeah.
So it is not real Greek. It is Grecanica. It is not real Greek. So the meaning is quite the same as Apuleius has.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So, other questions or remarks? So I would like to thank once again Olga Kinova, and I would like to give a second chance to Maria Chriti to present her paper. And
Yes.
fingers crossed.
Yes.
Okay.
George, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, Maria, it's
Okay.
by far better. So I will give you co-host rights
Okay.
to share your presentation.
Thank you. Sorry for this inconvenience. I don't know what's wrong. I'm keeping my camera off anyway, as you suggested, and I'm sharing my screen now. I hope this works. I hope it works this time. So can you all see my screen? Can you see?
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen.
Wow, that's great. So thank you so much for this second chance, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Well, what I would like to share with you is the reception of Platonic linguistics from Ammonius of Hermias, the 6th century Alexandrian Neoplatonic commentator on Aristotle. Now, Ammonius' commentary on Aristotle's On Interpretation is one of the two surviving Greek Neoplatonic commentaries written on one of the two surviving linguistic texts of ancient Greek philosophy, respectively. The earliest text is, of course, Plato's Cratilus, for which we have Proclus' commentary, and then we have Aristotle's On Interpretation, for which we have Ammonius' commentary. Now, both Proclus and Ammonius discuss both Plato and Aristotle, but what makes Ammonius' treatment more intriguing, in my opinion, is the fact that Ammonius was the student of Proclus in Athens, and then he became the teacher of Simplicius, John Philoponus, probably Olympiodorus, and other Neoplatonists in Alexandria, where Aristotle had to be explained as Plato's best student to facilitate the access to the divine Plato according to the prescriptive environment of that school. So Ammonius can actually give us a picture about the way that the Neoplatonic doctrines were transferred from Athens of Proclus to Alexandria, the metropolis of that very transitional and particular era. Now, Ammonius is also a follower of the so-called principle of agreement between Plato and Aristotle. According to this principle, the two philosophers only had superficial differences, and they basically agreed with each other. Now, not all the commentators adopted this principle, but Ammonius is the only one who tries to apply it regarding Plato's and Aristotle's linguistic positions. If we want to investigate what is new in Ammonius' treatment, we have to start from Plato's Cratilus, and then we have to go on with Aristotle, and then with the treatment of Proclus, so that we can see how Ammonius treats Plato, Aristotle, and Proclus in his treatment, and what is new in his writings regarding the Neoplatonic doctrines. Now, Plato's Cratilus, a very well-known work, of course, where we have a theoretical linguistic discussion among Socrates, Cratilus, and Hermogenes. Hermogenes says that names are completely conventional. Cratilus says that names were given by a superior power, named as a divine name giver by Socrates. And Socrates tries to mediate, to reconcile the two extreme views by telling us that, yes, a name can function as a didactic tool because it fits the nature of what is named, but we have to begin from things when we want to investigate something, because names can be deceitful. Now, the dialogue ends with no definite answer, and Aristotle is considered to give one definite answer in his very famous semantic passage in On Interpretation, where he says that words are symbols of what happens in the mental part of our soul. Aristotle actually uses the term symbols, again in his sophistical refutations, with exactly the same meaning. However, Aristotle does not adopt Hermogenes' total arbitrariness, because he explains, as you can see in the second text that I'm giving you, he explains that convention means agreement. So not anyone can name anything anyway, but a word has to be agreed upon by the members of a linguistic community. Now let's see what Proclus says on both Plato and Aristotle. Proclus says that there are 4 ways to sustain that something is by nature. Like a substance, the first one, like forces, for example, heat, like shadows and reflections, and like artificial images, technite ikones. I'm asking for your understanding regarding my non-Erasmian pronunciation, but this is the way we pronounce ancient Greek in modern Greece. So according to Proclus, Cratilus and Socrates adopt the 4th way. Why? Because both Cratilus and Socrates, according to Proclus, believe that names are invented in an artful and scientific way so that they can actually fit the nature of what is named. And through the lenses of Proclus, Aristotle is right opposite, because according to Proclus, Aristotle supports Hermogenes' view, which is the total arbitrariness. Now, Ammonius has very different things to say. First of all, Ammonius says that there are 2 ways to argue that names are by nature. The one is Cratilus' absolute naturalism. The second way is to think that names fit the nature of the objects. And in this, from this perspective, they can be considered as likenesses according to techne, homeomata kata technin. And homeoma is a term used by Aristotle himself right below in On Interpretation, but to designate natural representation. And then Ammonius introduces 2 ways to argue that names are by convention. The one is Hermogenes' absolute arbitrariness, and the second is to think that names are assigned, of course, and that's why they are by convention, but they are assigned by a name giver who has knowledge of the nature of things. So Ammonius says that the second by nature approach is in total agreement with the second by convention approach, because in both approaches, names fit the nature of what is named. And according to Ammonius, and this is the most intriguing part, this is the view of both Socrates and Aristotle. So what do we have as new here? First of all, Ammonius separates Socrates from Cratilus because he is interested in connecting Socrates, who is Plato according to him, with Aristotle, according to the principle of agreement that we mentioned earlier. And it is impossible to connect Cratilus with Aristotle's symbols. Then Ammonius separates Aristotle from Hermogenes' extreme arbitrariness, stepping on Aristotle's insistence on agreement that we also saw earlier. Then he borrows Proclean and Platonic terms, technite kata technin, and he combines these terms with Aristotle's term homeoma, because homeoma reminds him of Socratic mimima, imitation. So he arrives to the conclusion that names can be called both symbola. This is a term which cannot be questioned because it is explicitly formulated by Aristotle, and homeomata kata technin. And then you can see the wishful conclusion. Aristotle and Plato actually agree Ammonius says that, so there's nothing different between Aristotle and Plato, because neither does Aristotle accept total arbitrariness, nor Plato. So according to him, it is possible to say that the two thinkers actually agree. Now, Ammonius differentiates himself from Proclus, and one suggested reason in bibliography is that Ammonius does not believe in the metaphysical potential of names. In my opinion, this view has to be reconsidered because Ammonius, in his commentary on the categories, is proved to be a believer of the soul's immanent content as recollected with the help of names. And there are also other passages in which Ammonius resorts to the Neoplatonic theory of the three hypostases, where he also integrates the role of names. I think that Ammonius has to be contextualized in order to understand his differentiation from his teacher Proclus. It is possible that the reason is to be found in it is not possible that the reason is to be found in Ammonius' faith, in my opinion, but in his effort to prove that Plato and Aristotle do not disagree, since he focuses extensively on persuading us that Aristotle is not an adherent of total linguistic arbitrariness. I only presented you here a very small part from the pages that he dedicates on this issue. Now, Ammonius strictly presents Aristotle as an adherent of a specialist name giver, and this is something which is put in words for the first time in Neoplatonic commentaries. We have to think that the needs have changed regarding what it meant to be a Neoplatonic philosopher while Ammonius was the head of the school in Alexandria. Proclus didn't care about proving that Plato and Aristotle are in agreement. And I think that research has to emphasize on this as contextualized in the historical and intellectual milieu of the school of Alexandria, where Aristotle had to be explained before Plato, and where a philosopher had to conceive of Plato and Aristotle as a continuum for the sake of initiation to Neoplatonism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or remarks for Maria?
Well, I'm glad that you could all hear me, first of all, and see the presentation. Yes, this is important for me. Yes, okay.
Yes, and I think that your paper matches with the first paper by Nikolai.
Yes, it does.
Who also referred to names and the powers that names have sometimes. And I would like to ask you if you find out similarities between Iamblichus and Ammonius about the powers that names have.
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, now I think I can start my camera now. Yes. Well, thank you for your question. Actually, Ammonius doesn't have many similarities with Iamblichus because Ammonius doesn't discuss divine names, and he believes in the three hypostases, of course, but this is it. He doesn't have this all this background of Iamblichus. They don't have much in common, actually. Ammonius is very specific in proving that Aristotle, on the text of whom he is actually commenting, is not very far from Plato. So he doesn't resort to this kind of theories like Iamblichus.
He didn't have a theurgic aspect, so...
No, no, he didn't. Ammonius is very different from Iamblichus in this from this perspective, and he even differentiates himself from Proclus. This is why all this actually struck my attention, because he's He has learned his teacher's text by heart, as he says. He says that himself, but he differentiates himself because he is realistic, I think, and he tries to present, you know, this unified picture of Plato and Aristotle according to the needs of the school of Alexandria.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have seen today two different aspects, Ammonius and Dionysius, who were both pupils of Proclus, and the different routes they followed during their careers. Thank you very much. Other questions or remarks for Maria? Yeah, yes, Mustafa, please.
If I may, I might be out of context a little bit, but that was a very interesting talk. I enjoyed it very much, although it was very quick. I'm not sure if I got all the ideas correctly. One idea which I found it's because of the format of the presentation. It's not.
Okay.
So one idea that I found very interesting is this likeness. I mean, it might sound very naive as a question, but I wanted to see whether you find any further explanation. How is a sound to be like a meaning, like an idea? How does it look like? Do they explain this?
Well, I will tell you. Thank you for this. Is a very interesting question because likeness is a term used by Aristotle, but not to refer to the articulated human vocal sounds. Aristotle uses the term likeness to refer, for example, to the vocal sounds of animals, and not to the articulated human vocal sounds. Now, the Neoplatonic commentators, always use the term likeness to refer to natural representation. For example, a cough which comes out from our bodily organs when we are not well, or for example, crying or a cry. This is a likeness for them, not a symbol. And it's very interesting to see the way that they treat the difference between likeness and symbol. Likeness is natural for them, but it is natural because it doesn't represent the articulated vocal sound, which is conventional. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean,
there were absolutely many interesting ideas that I could pursue further. Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Donna, please.
Very brief, sort of to come into the conversation between the two of you, and sound versus perhaps gesture, or sound versus other ways of communicating. I can't help thinking, and I can't remember right now whether it was in Philo or somewhere else, that the description of ne and u, the uses of ne and u, or nai and u in the classical Greek pronunciation, are treated like a symbolica, because they actually represent the bringing of the head up and the bringing of the head down, and they're not meant to be sounds, and that's why they are referred to. I can't think of the reference now, but I think that between what Mustafa said and what you said about sound and not sound, and when the symbol.
Well, this is I don't remember something like this in the Neoplatonic commentators, but so maybe it's Philo. But yes, obviously.
Somewhat Platonic, you know. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. No, I mean the commentators that I've studied, Ammonius, Philoponus, Simplicius. I can't remember this, but this is a very interesting information because yes, it shows that symbol is something which represents in a very specific way. Yes, this is very interesting. Thank you.
So once again, thank you, Maria. Congratulations, and
thank you.
Now we have a 20 minutes break, and we resume the session at in 20 minutes, 6 p.m. p.m. Greek time, Athens time.
Thank you so much.
So I think it's 6 o'clock, so we can resume the session. We have another 2 papers before we conclude for today. The first paper is by Tamar Hubulava from the University of Freiburg, and the title of the paper is The Meaning of Divine Light in Us in Proclus Platonic Theology. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hi from Freiburg and from Germany. Yes, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this conference. I begin. I am trying to describe the meaning of divine light as a symbol of light in us and as a motivation for your knowledge and logical thinking in the 15th century Neoplatonic thinker Proclus philosophy. According to Proclus, our soul, which awakes in the body and no longer knows who it is and needs inspired impulse for self-knowledge. The motivation in us that leads the rational part of your soul to self-knowledge is something that is better than thinking. This something is divine light in us. It is the top of your existence and conducts us to the transcendental one with us. For all these reasons, it appears that soul needs to follow a hierarchy of knowledge levels to ascend to the unity. First, the divine light in us is the reason and motivation for your dialectical activity. Next, we came with our dialectical knowledge to the thinking itself, and then on the summit of this activity, which is the unit within us. So, the divine light in us is the way in which we became near to the One, which is in us a kind of image of the One. Proclus calls on the gods to kindle the light of truth in the soul. The light is a description for the shine of the divine in beings. It is important to think about the meaning of the sun in Plato's Republic. There the sun is a symbol of the good, which Plato describes in the following words, and it is the text one in your handouts. Then this is what I mean when I use the expression the offspring of the good, which the good produces in a proportion to itself, just as the good relates to the mind in the intelligible realm, and what is perceived by the mind. So this body, the sun, relates to sight and what can be seen. The question is, how does the analogy of the sun relate to Proclus' interpretation of the One? Proclus speaks on this in commentary of Plato's Parmenides. And text 2 in handout. Similarly, Socrates said in the Republic that the fifth principle is beyond existence and is not existence but cause of existence, and that it is beyond both everything that is intelliged and everything that is intelligized. Just as we say that the sun is the cause both of those who see and of that is seen. The sun is beyond sight and what can be seen, and we are the seers who cannot see what is beyond without a search. And text 3, also, I think there is sight in our eyes, and each possessor sets about using it, and there is also color in them. Yet, if there were not a third element built and especially for this purpose, you know that your sight would see nothing and colors would be imperceptible. The third thing that unites sight and what can be seen is light. Light is the medium that makes it possible to see the sun. The light as a synonym for thinking is tool to think the unthinkable and beyond the good. But the good cannot be known like everything else. The sun is the cause of light, but different and better than it. Then text 4. You will agree, I think, that the sun not only gave things that can be seen, the ability to be seen, but also their generation, growth, and nurture without being the generation itself. Proclus speaks about the meaning of the sun not only in Theology of Plato, but also dedicates a hymn to Helios. Helios, god of the sun, is described as the cause of the harmonic order and all kinds of creations in the world. The meaning of light in Proclus' system of thought is the thinking in us. Bayerwalters writes about it. Okay, I read it in German. Im Rückgang des Denkens in sich selbst, nämlich entdeckt dieses in sich das in ihm vorläufige Licht des Ursprungs und erfährt dieses als die entsprungene und dennoch in ihm selbst ursprüngliche Grundgelichtetheit seiner selbst. The thinking soul is expression for the fact that the soul turns back to the causes, also has been descended into the body. It is usual that Proclus first calls on the gods to kindle the light of truth in us. We read about the appeal to the gods not only in Proclus' commentary on Plato's works, but also in Chaldean oracles. For the mortal who has approached the fire will possess the light from God. In all the passages of the text where Proclus speaks about the light of truth, he adds that we should pray to the gods for the kindling of the light of truth in order to arrive at Plato's theology. The shining of divine light or the light of the sun in us, which is considered to be the thinking in the rational rate of the soul, is the transition from the good to the lower stages. The statement about the participation in the light of the divine is similar to what can be read about the principle of descent of the being from the one in the elements of theology. In order to become similar to the one and the good, it is important for all beings and super beings to see the light of the one. This means those beings who are near to the one are in the bright light, in contrast to those who are far from the first cause. Therefore, the first being is more perfect and of a fewer number than the following being. This is expressed in the elements of theology as follow. It's text 5. But infinitude of size or number signifies a complete lapse from indivisibility and total privation of it. For the quantitative finite is nearest to the indivisible and quantitative infinite, which has completely escaped from unite, is the most remote. It would be impossible to strive for the first cause if the first cause were not present within us. The presence of the unthinkable in the thinkable makes it possible to love the unthinkable and with the help of silence to experience it instantly. The relation between the ray of light of the one and the power of the soul to see this light in us has to analyze in different ways. While the ray of light is to be understood as a descent from the good within us is as well as mystical, act as a reason for recognizing yourself and the causes in us. The light, equal to all other intelligible levels between the one and the soul, has a medial function in the ascension of the soul. It is not possible to see the good itself directly through the divine light in us, because the soul is far too far removed from the good, and the distance has to be seen in the essential difference. While the good is beyond everything, the soul has descended into the body and cannot remember who it is. Because of this, it cannot be said that the good is recognized directly without any hierarchies in knowledge. Proclus' method in the Theology of Plato answers these questions by showing how the divine and the divine within us are reached. And this means that the philosophical path presented by Proclus, which is based on Plato's thought and is brought into harmony with other teachings, leads the soul to the divine level. So, for a better understanding of the ascension of the soul from the intellectual level to the superintelligible realm and beyond, it is important to consider the passage from the Theology of Plato, Book 1, Chapter 3, pages 15 to 17. The whole text passage can be discussed in the four steps. The step 1 is Proclus means that the intellectual part of the soul touched with the intellectual forms and the difference between them. And step 2 is while the intellectual forms are collected with the intellectual part of the soul, it is possible to ascend to the divine level with the top of the intellectual part. It means with the flower of the intellect. The soul on this level is similar to the gods. It means unified. From on the soul hurries to unite with the one in it. And step 3 is that a divine is grasped by the divine in the soul. That means the soul ascends into the divine realm using the following method. The similar is recognized through the similar. This thesis is fundamental for the description of the cognitive process of the soul and the return to the causes. And the last step 4, the soul reaches the divine level within it. That means it unites with itself and becomes entire. The union of the soul does not, however, represent the top of its ascent, since it has not yet reached the one in it and the one as the absolute unite standing beyond. Proclus describes the ascent from the divine level to the one in the soul and to the one in himself as mystic, because the soul is not anymore in an active state, but is silent, close its eyes, and experience closeness to the one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any remarks or questions? Enlightening ones, if it's possible. Yes, of course. Donna, please.
I feel terrible. Please do not call on me if there's anybody else has a question. I've been so isolated. Nobody to talk to.
I will follow you. Don't worry. Don't worry.
But as soon as somebody else wants to ask, thank you very much for this talk. And I was really delighted by the connection between that very little passage in Plato's Republic, you know, and the commentaries and the illumination, because it just so happens that this is in Arabic. This is the longest passage of Plato which has been preserved in the medieval Arabic translation, which I'm just checking because it includes book 6. I know that one page of it is missing. Book 6 between 504 and 509b, but one page in the middle is missing. But it's about it may be a link in the chain of how the Illuminationists, the Ishraqiyya of which was the Islamic form of Neoplatonism, and because of the topic, and especially in it was very enlightening, excuse me for the pun, how the connections between the commentaries and the Plato text maybe explain why this particular passage survived in the translation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very interesting. Yes. Yes. I don't know, but light has a very important meaning in Proclus philosophy, I think, because it is something medial between us and between this good, which is beyond all beings, and we need something to push us and to decide for ascension. Because when we speak about Proclus, it is of course very important to have in head that okay, we have this strong hierarchy, and when the soul comes in the body, it is something unnatural, and the body have to the soul has to decide. Okay, soul has to decide. For a rational part or for an irrational part, but it cannot remember anything. So this means the soul needs something what is better than soul self, and soul needs this motivation to decide for rational part. And I think it is maybe the light is this motivation in the soul to decide for this rational part and also for ascension.
Thank you.
This is as a direction, sorry, but okay.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Tamar, may I ask a question?
Yes,
Do you think that Proclus is interested equally on epistemological and ethical dimensions of light, or he focused in one of these two aspects?
It's a very interesting question. I am not sure if I can answer, but I think for Proclus is very important two ways. On the other hand, it is very important to follow this Plato's philosophy and heritage, Plato's heritage in the philosophy. So, but on the other hand, it is very important to describe this difficult ascension way from the body to this one. But these two ways are very important for my topic, and the other, okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks again, Tamar.
Thank you very much.